The massive space station hung in the darkness like a jewel made of crystal and light. It spun slowly around the bright center of the galaxy where millions of stars clustered together like diamonds, scattered on black cloth. This was the home of the Galactic Council, and today it would change everything for humanity. Commander. Jake Peterson adjusted his dress uniform one last time as he looked out the small window of the Earthship Liberty. Behind him, Dr. Lisa Martinez checked her data tablets while Captain Rick Thompson studied the alien vessels that surrounded them. Each alien ship looked like art compared to their own vessel, which seemed plain and simple next to the flowing curves and bright colors of the other craft. The Liberty had taken 3 months to reach this place, and now they were finally here to ask the most important question in human history. Would the Galactic Council accept Earth as a member of their great civilization that spanned the galaxy? For 200 years, humans had dreamed of this moment ever since they first learned they were not alone among the stars. The docking bay of the Council Station was enormous enough to hold 1,000 ships. Creatures of every shape and size moved through the air and along the walls. Some had wings that shimmered like soap bubbles, while others floated without any visible means of support. A few looked almost human, while others defied description with their strange forms and glowing parts. Peterson led his small team through corridors that seemed to change color as they walked. The walls showed images of 1,000 different worlds and the beings who lived on them. Martinez stopped several times to stare at creatures she had only read about in reports from deep space explorers. Thompson kept his hand near his sidearm, even though he knew it would be useless here. The council chamber was a sight that took their breath away. It rose up like the inside of a giant sphere, with seats arranged in circles that went up and up until they disappeared in the bright light above. Thousands of beings filled those seats, and their voices created a sound like wind through a forest of different trees. At the center of it all sat the Council Prime Overlord Vexithara. The ancient being was made of pure energy that shifted between blue and gold like a living flame. It had ruled the galaxy for longer than human civilization had existed, and its voice could be heard without any speakers or translation devices. The Zephyrian ambassador stood to present Earth's case. The tall insect creature had transparent wings that caught the light and made rainbow patterns on the floor. Its voice was like music when it spoke about humanity's achievements and their desire to join the galactic community. Peterson felt proud as he listened to the list of human accomplishments. They had ended most wars on their planet. They had spread to dozens of worlds. They had developed faster than light travel and made contact with several alien species. They had art and music and literature that showed the depth of human spirit. But as the ambassador finished speaking, something changed in the great chamber. It started as a small sound from one section of seats, then spread like ripples in a pond. The sound grew louder, and Peterson realized with growing horror that the entire council was laughing at them. The laughter was not cruel exactly, but it was dismissive in a way that hurt worse than anger. It was the laughter of adults watching children play at being grown up. It echoed through the chamber and seemed to go on forever, while Peterson and his team stood frozen in the center of it all. Prime Overlord Vexithara raised one tendril of energy, and the laughter slowly died away. When it spoke, its voice filled every corner of the vast space, and Peterson felt the words like physical blows to his chest. Your species has accomplished much for such young beings, but you are not ready for membership in our council. You have barely learned to travel between stars while we have done so for millions of years. You still fight wars over resources that we harvest from empty space. You have no telepathic abilities and no connection to the quantum consciousness that binds all advanced life together. The Drakmari representative slithered forward on its snake-like body. Its scales shifted from green to red as it spoke, and its forked tongue tasted the air between words. Most troubling is your violent nature. Your history shows endless conflict, and your first instinct when meeting new species is often aggression. You are simply too primitive and dangerous to join civilized space. Other council members began to speak, and each word was like another nail in the coffin of human dreams. The Crystalline Collective noted that humans lacked the biotechnological integration that allowed true advancement. The Void Dancers pointed out that humanity had no spiritual connection to the cosmic forces that guided enlightened species. Peterson tried to speak, but his voice seemed small and weak in the vast chamber. He wanted to defend his species and explain that humans had much to offer, but the council had already moved on as if Earth no longer mattered. The vote was quick and unanimous. Not only would Earth be denied membership, but the Council imposed a quarantine zone around human space. No human ship could travel beyond 50 light-years from Earth without facing what they called corrective measures. Humanity was to remain in their small corner of the galaxy until they either evolved beyond their current limitations or destroyed themselves trying. The formal session ended. Peterson heard younger aliens making jokes about the primitive ape descendants who thought they belonged among the stars. Some placed bets on how long it would take for humanity to wipe itself out, now that they knew how far they had to go. The casual cruelty of it was worse than any deliberate insult could have been. Dr. Martinez had tears in her eyes as they walked back to their ship. Captain Thompson's face was red with anger and his hands were clenched into fists. Peterson felt numb, as if someone had hit him very hard and he was still waiting for the pain to register. The trip back to Earth was the longest 3 months of their lives. They sent messages ahead to prepare the government for what was coming. But Peterson knew that nothing could really prepare humanity for this level of rejection and humiliation. As Earth grew larger in their view screen, Peterson made a silent promise to himself and to his species. The Council had called them unworthy and primitive. They had laughed at human achievements and dismissed human potential. They had built a cage around Earth and dared humanity to try to break free. Peterson stared at the blue and white planet that had given birth to his species and felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. The aliens thought they knew what humans were capable of, but they had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated the power of human pride and the lengths to which his species would go when someone told them they were not good enough. The Council wanted to see what humanity could become when pushed to their limits. Peterson smiled grimly as the Liberty entered Earth's atmosphere. They were about to find out. 5 years had passed since the day that changed everything for humanity. The rejection by the Galactic Council had hit Earth like a physical blow, but instead of breaking the human spirit, it had forged it into something harder and more determined than ever before. President Mary Sullivan stood at the podium in the great assembly hall where representatives from every human colony had gathered. The hall was silent as she looked out at the faces of people from Earth and Mars and the moons of Jupiter, and the distant stations that orbited other stars. Behind her, a massive screen showed the image of space with the invisible barrier that the aliens had drawn around human territory. They called us unworthy, she said, and her voice carried to every corner of the hall and beyond to every human settlement in known space. They said we were too primitive to join their civilized galaxy. They laughed at our achievements and locked us away like dangerous animals in a cage. Today we begin to prove them wrong. The applause that followed was not the polite clapping of politicians, but the roar of an angry species that had been pushed too far. Sullivan waited for quiet, then continued with words that would be remembered for centuries. We will not beg for their acceptance. We will not try to become what they think we should be. Instead, we will become something they never expected, and when we are ready, we will show them the true strength of humanity. Deep beneath the surface of Mars, Dr. Alex Chen worked in laboratories that had been carved from the red rock itself. The Prometheus project was the most ambitious undertaking in human history, and Chen was its chief architect. Around him, hundreds of scientists and engineers labored on technologies that would have seemed like magic just a decade before. The aliens had rejected humanity for lacking telepathic powers and biotechnological integration. Chen had studied every scrap of information about alien abilities and found something the Council had missed. Humans were not lacking these traits, but were naturally immune to them, where other species had evolved to share thoughts and merge with technology. Humans had developed in isolation, and that isolation was their greatest strength. In the weapons laboratories, Colonel Sandra Brooks supervised the testing of devices that would make the aliens reconsider their dismissal of human military potential. The Council species relied on energy shields and psychic defenses that had protected them for millions of years. Brooks had discovered that these defenses had a common weakness: they could not protect against simple kinetic force. The humans were building weapons that fired solid metal projectiles at incredible speeds. To the aliens, these would seem impossibly primitive, but Brooks knew that primitive could be devastatingly effective when used correctly. A chunk of metal moving fast enough could punch through any energy barrier, and no amount of telepathic power could stop basic physics. Admiral Kevin O'Connor stood in the orbital shipyards above Earth, where the largest construction project in human history was taking place. The new fleet bore no resemblance to the ships that had carried the first diplomats to the council. These vessels were angular and dark with hulls made from materials that absorbed sensor beams. Instead of reflecting them, each ship was a weapon designed for a single purpose: to break the cage that surrounded humanity and carry the fight to those who had built it. O'Connor had served in the old fleet and remembered the humiliation of arriving at the council station in ships that looked like toys compared to alien vessels. The new fleet would inspire no laughter from anyone. Dr. Rachel Clark worked on the most secret projects in laboratories that officially did not exist. She had taken apart every piece of alien technology that humans had ever found and learned how to turn their own science against them. Her quantum viruses could infect the crystalline minds of silicon-based life forms. Her electromagnetic pulse weapons could disrupt the bioelectrical systems that many aliens used instead of electronics. But Clark's greatest discovery was how to weaponize humanity's immunity to psychic effects. She had built generators that created fields of psychic nullification that could cut alien telepaths off from their abilities and leave them helpless and confused. The aliens who had mocked humans for lacking mental powers would soon learn that sometimes absence was more powerful than presence. The most important work was being done by Professor William Hayes in the Theoretical Physics Department. Hayes had discovered that human consciousness existed in a quantum state that naturally interfered with psychic fields. This was why humans had never developed telepathy, not because they lacked the ability, but because their minds automatically blocked such connections. Hayes had found a way to amplify this natural ability and project it across vast distances. A single human ship equipped with his psychic dampening technology could cut off entire alien fleets from their command structure and leave them as helpless as ships without radios. The preparation was not just about weapons and technology. Ambassador Claire Foster led diplomatic teams that reached out to other species who had been rejected or oppressed by the Council. She discovered that humanity was not alone in its resentment of the galactic government that claimed to represent all civilized life. Dozens of younger species had been told they were not ready for Council membership. Others had been accepted, but only as junior partners with no real voice in galactic affairs. Foster began building a network of allies who shared humanity's desire for change and who would be ready to act when the time came. Training centers on every human world worked around the clock to prepare for what was coming. Children learned strategy and tactics alongside reading and mathematics. Adults practiced with weapons and spacecraft in simulations that grew more realistic every day. Even the elderly contributed by sharing knowledge of old military tactics that the aliens had forgotten existed. The alien species had evolved beyond the need for certain types of warfare, but humans remembered everything. They knew how to fight in space and on planets and in the dark between stars. They knew how to win through superior numbers or better tactics or simple stubborn refusal to give up. Most importantly, they knew how to adapt and change while their enemies remained locked in patterns millions of years old. The 5 years of preparation drew to a close. Admiral Peterson stood on the bridge of the new flagship Retribution and looked out at the fleet that surrounded Earth. 300 ships hung in formation around the blue planet, and each one represented years of work and sacrifice and burning determination to prove the aliens wrong. The Council had wanted to keep humanity locked away until they evolved or destroyed themselves. Peterson smiled as he gave the order that would change galactic history forever. They were about to learn that humans had indeed evolved, but not in any way the aliens had expected. They had evolved into something the galaxy had not seen for millions of years, a species that refused to accept the limitations others placed on them. The cage was about to be broken from the inside, and the sound of its destruction would echo across every star in the galaxy. The attack began at exactly the same moment across 17 different star systems, as human fleets emerged from hyperspace with perfect coordination. For 5 years, the aliens had grown comfortable with their invisible cage around human territory, but now that cage was being shattered from the inside by forces they had never imagined possible. Admiral Peterson led the main assault force as they dropped out of hyperspace near the Vega system, where the Zephyrians had built their largest monitoring station. The alien outpost hung in space like a giant flower made of metal and crystal with sensor arrays that could detect ships from dozens of light years away. Those same sensors had been watching human space for years to make Sure, no one tried to break the quarantine. The Zephyrians detected the human fleet immediately, but their reaction was confusion rather than alarm. According to their calculations, no human ship should be able to reach this far from Earth, and the vessels approaching them looked nothing like the primitive craft they remembered from 5 years ago. The station commander sent a message demanding that the humans explain their presence and return to their designated territory. Captain Michelle Roberts commanded the lead ship Defiance, and her response was a wave of small objects that poured from her vessel like angry insects. The Zephyrians had never seen anything like the swarm of autonomous drones that now surrounded their station. Each drone was smaller than a fighter craft and seemed harmless individually, but there were thousands of them, and they moved with mechanical precision. The aliens tried to target the drones with their energy weapons, but the small craft were too numerous and too fast. While the station's defenses focused on the swarm, the human ships closed to point-blank range and opened fire with weapons the Zephyrians had never encountered. Solid metal projectiles moving at incredible speed punched through their energy shields as if they did not exist and tore great holes in the station's hull. Within minutes, the pride of the Zephyrian border fleet was reduced to spinning debris and twisted metal. The aliens who had survived the attack sent frantic messages to their high command, but found that their communication systems had been jammed by technology they could not understand or counter. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy as human forces struck at 17 targets simultaneously. At Kepler Station, the Drakmari fortress fell to an attack that turned their own bioships against them. The humans had learned to broadcast signals that confused the biological computers. The snake-like aliens used to control their vessels. The crystalline mining facility at Wolf 359 went silent when human ships deployed Professor Hayes' psychic dampening fields. The silicon-based aliens who operated the facility were part of a hive mind that spanned light years but suddenly found themselves cut off from their collective consciousness and unable to coordinate any defense. On the planet Proxima Secundus, General Tony Martinez led the most daring assault of all. The world housed the Galactic Council's premier military academy, where the finest warriors from a dozen species learned the art of warfare. The aliens had trained for combat against enemies who used energy weapons and psychic abilities, but they had never faced humans in powered armor carrying weapons that fired simple bullets. The assault began before dawn as human drop ships landed in the academy courtyard. The alien cadets responded quickly, but their training had not prepared them for enemies who ignored their telepathic commands and shrugged off their energy weapons. The humans moved through the academy, buildings like an unstoppable force smashing through defenses that had been designed to stop very different kinds of attacks. The young Zephyrians tried to use their natural speed and agility, but found that human reflexes enhanced by mechanical suits were just as fast. The Drakmari cadets attempted to use their bioweapons, but discovered that human armor was designed to seal against biological attacks. The crystalline students tried to coordinate through their hive mind connection, but found themselves cut off by psychic dampening fields. Within 3 hours, the academy that had trained galactic warriors for thousands of years had fallen to a force of humans who fought like nothing the aliens had ever seen. General Martinez stood in the academy's main hall, surrounded by captured alien weapons and equipment, while his soldiers secured the facility. But the real shock for the galactic community came when Dr. Lisa Martinez appeared on every communication channel across Council space. Behind her stood beings that most aliens thought were myths from the dawn of galactic civilization. The Ancients were an elder race that had ruled the galaxy long before the current council existed, and their reappearance changed everything. The ancient representative spoke through harmonics that bypassed normal translation systems and reached directly into the minds of those who heard it. The current council has grown weak and corrupt in their power. They have forgotten that strength comes from growth and challenge, not from stagnation and control. These humans remind us of what we once were when the galaxy was young and full of possibility. The revelation that humanity had formed an alliance with the ancients sent shockwaves through every corner of council space. If the elder race supported the human rebellion, then perhaps the established order was not as permanent as everyone had believed. More importantly, the ancient endorsement gave legitimacy to human actions in the eyes of countless species who had been waiting for someone to challenge council authority. Within hours of the attacks, reports began flooding in from across the galaxy. The Centauri Mining Guild declared independence from council oversight. The Outer Rim Collective announced they would no longer pay tribute to the central government. Even some established council member species began questioning whether the current system truly served the interests of galactic civilization. Admiral Peterson's fleet advanced toward the galactic core, gathering allies and momentum with each victory. Species that had been oppressed or ignored by the council for centuries suddenly found their voices and demanded change. The quarantine zone that was supposed to contain humanity became the launching point for a revolution that spread faster than light across known space. On the council station that had once witnessed humanity's humiliation, emergency sessions convened as representatives tried to understand how their perfect order was collapsing so quickly. Prime Overlord Vexithara raged at subordinates who brought only bad news, while military commanders scrambled to organize a response to an enemy they did not understand. The humans had broken every rule of civilized warfare. They ignored psychic commands and energy shields. They used primitive weapons that somehow proved more effective than advanced technology. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to actually enjoy fighting in a way that the evolved council species found deeply unsettling. As Admiral Peterson's fleet moved deeper into council space, the alien government faced a reality they had not encountered in millions of years. For the first time since the dawn of their civilization, they were losing a war and they had no idea how to win it back. The war that followed would reshape the galaxy, and its outcome would be remembered long after the last star burned cold in the darkness. Prime Overlord Vexthera had mobilized every ship and warrior the Council could muster, creating a fleet of 10,000 vessels that represented the combined military might of dozens of advanced civilizations. The two great fleets met in the Rigel Nebula, where swirling clouds of gas and dust created a battlefield unlike any other. Admiral Peterson commanded from the bridge of the Retribution, while across the void, Admiral Sektar of the Drakmari led the Council forces in a massive dreadnought that bristled with weapons designed to crack planets. The Council fleet was everything humanity was not. Each ship was a work of art as much as a weapon, with flowing lines and surfaces that seemed to bend light itself. Their crews were the finest warriors from species that had perfected combat over millions of years. Their weapons could tear holes in space, and their shields could deflect the energy of stars. But as the battle began, the aliens discovered that all their advantages meant nothing against an enemy who refused to fight by the rules they understood. The Council ships arranged themselves in the traditional formations that had served them well for millennia, but the humans scattered like a school of fish and attacked from directions that made no tactical sense. Captain Danny Foster led the first assault in a move that no alien commander would ever consider. He aimed his ship directly at the center of the enemy formation, where their largest dreadnoughts waited with enough firepower to destroy a moon. Foster's vessel was loaded with antimatter charges, and he intended to ram it straight into the heart of the Council fleet. The aliens tried to stop him, but their weapons were designed for long-range duels between massive ships, not for targeting a single small vessel diving through their defensive lines. Foster's ship took hit after hit but kept coming, until it reached the gap between two Council dreadnoughts and detonated in a flash of light that could be seen from parsecs away. The explosion tore 3 alien capital ships apart and created a hole in their formation that Commander Betty Lewis immediately exploited. She led her squadron through a maneuver that violated every principle of safe space flight by diving into the gravity well of a nearby star and using its pull to slingshot around to the enemy rear. Half of Lewis's ships were torn apart by gravitational forces that would have crushed any normal vessel, but the survivors emerged behind the Council fleet, moving faster than anything the aliens had ever seen. They punched through the enemy rear guard and began attacking the support ships that kept the main fleet supplied and coordinated. The battle raged for 6 days as both fleets hammered each other with everything they had. The humans lost ships at a terrible rate, but they kept fighting with a ferocity that shocked their enemies. When alien warriors boarded human vessels, they found crews who fought hand to hand with knives and clubs when their advanced weapons failed. The aliens had evolved beyond such primitive brutality, but the humans embraced it. They turned their ships into bombs when they could no longer fight as vessels. They used debris as weapons when they ran out of missiles. They rammed enemy ships with escape pods when their own craft were destroyed. By the time the battle ended, both fleets were shattered ruins drifting in the nebula, but the psychological victory belonged to humanity. They had proven that the mighty council could be hurt, and that realization spread terror through the alien command structure. For the first time in their recorded history, the war spread to hundreds of star systems as the conflict consumed entire sectors of the galaxy. On the jungle world of Kepler 442b, Colonel Jimmy Stewart led human Marines against Zephyrian bio-warriors in a campaign that turned the planet's own ecosystem into a weapon. The aliens were faster and stronger individually, but human tactics overcame every advantage. Stewart's forces moved in coordinated units that supported each other while the Zephyrians fought as individuals relying on their superior abilities. The humans used the jungle itself as cover and created traps that turned the aliens' speed against them. They poisoned water sources with chemicals that disrupted biotechnological systems and used fire weapons that the nature-loving Zephyrians could not bring themselves to counter effectively. In space, the war evolved as new technologies emerged from both sides. Dr. Nathan Clark developed missiles that could burrow through alien hulls like living creatures and consume ships from the inside. Engineer Samantha Rodriguez created the first human psychic dampening fields powerful enough to affect entire solar systems, cutting off alien fleets from their command networks. The tide of war truly turned when humanity's alliance with oppressed species began to bear fruit. The Tau-Cetians contributed their mastery of stellar engineering, helping humans turn stars themselves into weapons. Entire enemy fleets found themselves trapped in solar systems where the local star had been modified to emit radiation that disrupted their technology. The Vegan Confederacy shared their knowledge of interdimensional warfare, allowing human ships to attack from directions that existed outside normal space. Council fleets would find themselves under assault from vessels that appeared to emerge from nowhere and vanish just as quickly, leaving only destruction in their wake. But the war's most crucial moment came when human intelligence discovered the location of the Nexus. The massive space station was built around a controlled black hole at the center of Council space and served as the source of their power. All their communication networks flowed through it, and their fastest ships used it as a hub for traveling across the galaxy. Admiral Peterson knew that destroying the Nexus would cripple the Council's ability to coordinate their vast territory, but the mission would require volunteers for what amounted to a suicide run. When he asked for ships to make the assault, every human captain in the fleet stepped forward without hesitation. Peterson selected Captain Roy Jackson to lead the final attack aboard the vessel Vengeance. As Jackson's small fleet approached the Nexus, they faced not just the station's massive defenses, but the entire remaining Council fleet that had been called back to protect their most vital installation. 100 human ships faced 5,000 alien vessels in the twisted space around a black hole where gravity bent light and time moved differently. The battle that followed became legend as the humans fought their way through layers of defenses while reality itself seemed to break down around them. Jackson's ship was the last one left as it broke through the final defensive line. His hull was cracked and his crew was dead, but his engines still functioned, and his cargo of quantum torpedoes was intact. With his dying breath, Jackson activated the weapons that would destabilize the Nexus and bring down the galactic order that had oppressed so many for so long. The explosion that followed could be seen from 1,000 light-years away, and its light would shine for centuries as a reminder that even the mightiest empires could fall when confronted by those who refused to accept their place in an unjust universe. The destruction of the Nexus marked the end of Council supremacy, but not the end of fighting across the galaxy. Scattered groups of alien loyalists made desperate last stands on dozens of worlds while others tried to flee to the dark spaces between stars where they hoped to hide. Until the storm passed. On the crystalline homeworld of Zeta Reticuli, General Susan Campbell led human forces through cities made of living crystal where every building could become a weapon and every street could change its shape to trap invaders. The silicon-based aliens who lived there fought with weapons that grew from the ground itself and defenses that reformed faster than conventional forces could destroy them. But Campbell had studied the weaknesses of crystalline technology and knew that all their advantages depended on quantum resonance fields that connected each crystal to every other. Her forces carried sonic disruptors that shattered those connections and left the alien cities as helpless as ordinary rock formations. The Drakmari attempted one final gambit, using their mastery of biological warfare to create a plague designed specifically to target human DNA. The disease spread rapidly through Earth's colonies and seemed unstoppable, as it killed millions before anyone understood what was happening. Dr. Patricia Wilson led the crash program to develop countermeasures, working for 72 hours without sleep as the plague consumed entire cities. She discovered that the bioweapon could be defeated by flooding human bloodstreams with a simple mineral compound that the snake-like aliens had never encountered in their sterile laboratory environments. Wilson's cure saved billions of lives and proved once again that human adaptability could overcome even the most sophisticated alien science. The failed plague attack was the last major effort by Council forces to turn the tide of war, and its failure broke the spirit of remaining resistance movements. The final confrontation took place not on a battlefield but in the Great Chamber where humanity had first been rejected 5 years earlier. The Council station still orbited the galactic core, but now it housed very different proceedings as the surviving alien leaders faced judgment for their crimes. Ambassador Claire Foster had been promoted to Secretary General of the Free Species Alliance, and she stood where Admiral Peterson had once been humiliated to present the case against the former galactic government. The chamber was filled with representatives from hundreds of species that had been oppressed or ignored by the Council for millennia. Former Prime Overlord Vex Thara sat in a containment field designed to hold energy beings while other Council leaders occupied similar restraints. The proud aliens who had once ruled the galaxy now faced the same kind of dismissive treatment they had given to younger species for so long. Foster presented evidence of systematic oppression that spanned millions of years. The Council had hoarded resources that could have lifted entire civilizations from poverty. They had suppressed technological development that threatened their control. They had destroyed species that refused to accept their authority and erased others from galactic records to hide their crimes. The ancient energy being that had once mocked humanity tried to defend its actions. With words that rang hollow in the vast chamber, we brought order to chaos and prevented the wars that would have consumed the galaxy. If every species had been allowed to develop freely, we saved countless lives by maintaining stability across known space. Foster's response echoed across the galaxy as it was broadcast to every world where intelligent life existed. You prevented growth and change and progress. You turned the galaxy into a museum where nothing could evolve beyond what you allowed. You stole the future from billions of beings who deserved the chance to choose their own destiny, even if they chose poorly. The trial continued for months as species after species testified about Council oppression. The Centauri described how their mining operations had been controlled to benefit alien corporations. The Vegan Confederacy explained how their scientific research had been restricted to prevent them from developing technologies the Council feared. Even some of the Council's former member species admitted that they had supported the system only because they feared what would happen if they spoke against it. The trial revealed that the galactic government had ruled through fear rather than consent and had maintained power by convincing everyone that the alternative would be chaos. When the evidence phase ended, the tribunal reached a unanimous verdict. The Galactic Council was dissolved, and its leaders were sentenced to exile in the void between galaxies where they could harm no one. The old system of government was replaced by the Galactic Federation based on principles of equality and representation. But the story's true ending came not in the courtroom but in a quiet moment aboard the Constitution flagship of the new Federation fleet. Admiral Peterson had been promoted to Supreme Commander of Federation Forces while Dr. Lisa Martinez served as Chief Science Officer for the new government. They stood together on the observation deck watching ships from hundreds of different species travel freely through space that had once been restricted to Council members only. Former enemies worked side by side, sharing technology and culture in ways the rigid hierarchy had never allowed. A human transport ship docked alongside an alien research vessel as scientists from both species collaborated on projects that would benefit everyone. Nearby, a Zephyrian merchant ship traded with Drekmari colonists, while their children played together in the station's common areas, without any thought of the ancient hatreds their parents had inherited. Peterson watched the peaceful scene and remembered the humiliation he had felt in this same chamber 5 years earlier when the Council had rejected humanity's application for membership. The aliens had called his species unworthy and primitive and had locked them away like dangerous animals, Martinez joined him at the viewing port and spoke the words that had started their long journey to this moment. They called us unworthy, she said softly as she watched Alien. Children laugh at human jokes, while their parents discussed trade agreements and scientific partnerships. Peterson nodded as he remembered the anger and determination that had driven humanity to prove the Council wrong. Maybe we were unworthy back then, he admitted as he watched a former Council species ask human engineers for help with their ship repairs. But we became worthy, and in the process we helped everyone else. Remember that they deserved better than what they had been told to accept. The camera pulled back to show the vast space station where the new Federation conducted its business. Where once there had been rigid hierarchy, there was now cooperation. Where once there had been stagnation, there was now growth and change and endless possibility. Ships from 1,000 worlds moved through the void carrying trade, goods and scientific data and cultural exchanges that would enrich every species in the galaxy. The quarantine zones were gone, and the barriers between civilizations had been replaced by bridges built on mutual respect. Humanity's revenge had not been destruction, but transformation. They had not sought to replace the Council's tyranny with their own, but had instead created something better, a galaxy where every species could reach for the stars without asking permission from those who claimed to know better. The stars themselves seemed brighter now, as if they too had been freed from the cage that had once contained their light.